what's up, friends and family and friends, and welcome to the 362nd episode of Tone's Take. As we are just 3 days away from the end of the year. I'm pretty sure it's either 361st or 2nd. Who knows? Anyway, thank you for joining. I wanted to talk about this article that I was reading in the New York Times. I didn't really, find anything trending that I wanted to talk about. I didn't find anything, worthwhile. Everything was just stupid stuff. You have on Netflix the whole Black Mirror Bandersnatch. You have Bird Box. Everyone's talking about entertainment and things that are just pretty frivolous in my mind. So I was reading the New York Times, digging deep for a story to talk about, and I found this one about young inmates that say they were being shipped upstate to a correctional facility in Albany, them being held in isolation and beaten. And it's not a really lengthy article. It's by Jan Ransom. It came out today online. It'll be in the physical paper tomorrow. Basically, it's talking about young inmates under the age of 21 who were being taken out of Rikers in New York City to an airfield hours north of the city, where they would get abused. A dozen correctional officers would give them deliberately confusing commands, and if they failed to comply with those commands, the guards would pummel them and kick them and use tasers and even shove their fingers and batons into their rectum. I mean, pretty vivid stuff. This is not Rikers, the guard shouted before sending the inmates to solitary confinement at the jail, the Albany County Correctional Facility. And I mean, this is pretty horrid stuff to think about when you hear about, injustices happening here in the United States. This is right here in the U.S. The abuse was designed or designated for inmates from Rikers who have been accused of assaulting corrections officers, according to the lawsuit, which there is a lawsuit that's been filed in federal district court in Manhattan by 3 inmates and another young man who had been held in the Albany jail. So obviously this is one of those tit-for-tat things. These are men who apparently have assaulted corrections officers, and now for that reason they're being punished by literally being physically punished, tortured, and pretty much dismantled. And my question is this right? As correctional officers, look, if you go into that line of work, if this is the line of work that you choose, if you choose to be a police officer or anything like that, you are putting yourself in the line of fire. It's like being a firefighter. You're going to have to fight fires. Being a doctor, you're going to have to do surgery. Being a police officer or a corrections officer, you're going to have to deal with people who are going to hit you, kick you, punch you. Heck, being a teacher in inner city Detroit, you're going to have to deal with the same thing. But you can't take out your anger and frustration by beating people in return. Your job is to do your job, and there's nothing in your mandate that says that you have the ability or the right to attack people or to ship them to another facility where they will be attacked and all these things happen. So anyway, in many cases, inmates were sent away from New York that have been sent away from New York City have been accused of assaulting guards and are transferred in part because their safety cannot be ensured. The lawsuit filed against the city, Albany County officials and individual correction officers said the inmates' constitutional rights were violated when they were sent upstate without any regard for their welfare, and that the men were systematically targeted for brutal treatment carried out by high-ranking correction staff. The lawsuit will reveal that the city knows what's going on and that it condones it, said one of the lawyers, Catherine Rosenfield, for the plaintiffs, who are represented by 2 private law firms. They keep putting people in the van and sending them up there knowingly, which is just horrible. Of course, the spokesman for the Albany mayor, Eric Phillips, didn't respond. I don't think we heard anything from the New York mayor, or maybe that is the New York mayor. I don't know who's the mayor of New York now. I thought it was still Bill de Blasio. I don't know these things. The Albany County Sheriff's Office also did not respond. The inmates' situation was exacerbated when they were sent to solitary confinement, according to the lawsuit. Isolation increases the risk of depression or suicide, especially among younger inmates. The city's jail reforms were inspired in part by Mr. de Blasio, by Khalif Browder, who was a teenager who committed suicide after spending much of his 3 years at Rikers in solitary confinement before robbery charges against him were dropped. So here you have a young man who was actually charged for robbery that he did not do, or at least the charges were dropped, and he was put in solitary confinement for 3 months. And tell me how that makes sense, especially if you're under the age of 21. Really, for anyone, I just believe that solitary confinement is not right. If you're going to put someone in solitary confinement, you might as well just put them out of their misery and kill them. We are not meant to be in solitary confinement, and I think it is cruel and unusual punishment. Just kill the person in my mind. But, that's why I don't make the rules anyway to begin with. One of the plaintiffs, actually, two of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit were 19 and 21 when they were transferred to Albany. The other two were older than 22. One of the plaintiffs is issued only as a John Doe because he fears retaliation by the corrections officers, which, again, if you're a corrections worker, you should not have the ability to retaliate in any way. One of the plaintiffs, Davon Washington, who is now 22, said in an interview at his home in the Bronx that he wrote the mayor and heard nothing back from the mayor. Mr. Washington was transferred from Rikers to Albany in March, 2 weeks after he said he got into an altercation with a city deputy warden. He was there until November and released from the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision in Albany on Monday, just recently. He had been convicted of attempted robbery. Let me just scroll down a little bit because this isn't a long article, but it is pretty ridiculous. Mr. Washington was handcuffed and shackled. Let me go up. So he said there was a lieutenant who led the attacks and directed the officers while a superintendent watched. The officers accused him of hiding contraband in his body, but he said he did not have anything on him. He said a correction officer inserted 2 fingers into his rectum. He said he was taken to a body scanner. Nothing found. At one point, a nurse asked if he had any injuries. When he said he did, he was punched in the face. Mr. Washington, who was handcuffed and shackled, was eventually placed in isolation. While inside a small cell, he said the officers attacked him again. After the beating, he was bleeding. His tooth was chipped, his lip was split, and he had bruises all over his body. During the attacks, he said he thought he was going to die. I mean, these are just horrific things that are happening, and they should not be happening. He received an infraction ticket for trying to assault an officer, which he said was a bogus claim. At a disciplinary hearing, he was sentenced to 360 days in isolation and denied phone privileges for a month. He said he was beaten again in October after correction officers learned he had met with lawyers about his allegations of abuse. The city failed to investigate or remediate these conditions and has continued sending detainees, including many aged 21 and younger, to the Albany County Jail without notice or a hearing at all. This is just horrific, terrible things. And again, they're beaten and then put into solitary confinement. Other plaintiffs include Paris Tillery, who's 25, and Stephen Espinal, 19. Espinal was one of 4 inmates charged with a gang assault for the attack on Rikers Island Correction Officer Jean Souffrant, which was captured on video. The attack left the officer's spine fractured. When you hear stories like this, when you hear about corrections officers who end up being injured, when you hear about them, being beaten by 4 criminals, yes, you do get angry. You do look at, them as your brothers, police officers who, swore an oath and do whatever. They go through all this training, years and years, months and months, whatever they do to become officers or corrections officers, whatever they do, and then you see them get hurt like this. Yes, it does make you angry. As a human being, it makes you angry. It pisses you off. But that does not give you or anyone the right to attack these criminals. They're criminals, and by attacking them, you reduce yourself to a criminal as well. The 2 wrongs don't make a right. It's just, that's like the age-old rule, right? Mr. Espinal said he was beaten in Albany, lost hearing in his left ear, and passed blood in his urine after the attacks. And many corrections officers or police officers might read this and say, yeah, well, he deserved it. Many people might say, yeah, he deserved it. And yes, we can say that, yes, he deserved this attack. But at the same time, no, he didn't. Corrections officers should not be allowed to lay their hands on them, no matter how bad the situation gets. Their job is to just keep the peace in the jail cell, not to be beating these people, not to do all this stuff. It's beyond me. So this Mr. Espinal guy was hospitalized and sentenced to 600 days in solitary confinement. They would say these are violent kids. These kids have done, some of them, very violent things, but at the end of the day, they're human. And if these humans do violent things, then we use the court of law to deal with them accordingly. Corrections officers should not be taking the law into their own hands. And that's where I leave it. That's my take on this whole thing. So hopefully this lawsuit will bring to light what actually did happen. Again, all of these are allegations at this point. Nothing has actually been, brought to light. No one's been charged. No one's been convicted yet. But I would love to hear your take on this. Just have the conversation down below, and I'll be checking in daily throughout to see what you have to say. Anyway, thanks for watching. Again, I'd love to know what you think. Just a few more days and I am done for the year and possibly forever. Who knows? All right, thanks for watching. Peace out and God bless.